Step back into a time when life felt a little slower, when disco ruled the airwaves, when kids rushed home to watch Saturday morning cartoons, and when the school cafeteria was a world of its own. The 1970s weren't just about bell-bottoms, lava lamps, and vinyl records. They were about lunch trays loaded with the foods that fueled an entire generation. If you close your eyes, you can almost smell it. The unmistakable aroma of pizza day drifting through the hallways long before lunchtime arrived, teasing hungry stomachs. You can picture a thermos of chocolate milk being cracked open, the chill escaping like a puff of sweet-scented fog. You can hear the laughter of friends trading cookies for chips, or the buzz of excitement when a favorite meal appeared on the menu board. For every kid in the 1970s, those lunches weren't just meals, they were rituals, moments that stitched together childhood memories and flavors that remain unforgettable decades later. Food has a way of freezing time, and for millions of children across America, those cafeteria trays became snapshots of an era. The world outside may have been changing, politics, technology, fashion, but inside those cafeterias, life was measured in pizza squares, grilled cheese sandwiches, and scoops of mashed potatoes. If you've ever wanted to take a bite out of memory itself, this journey is for you. Stay with us as we travel back to the cafeteria tables of the 1970s and relive 15 classic school lunches every kid from that era remembers. Share this story with friends, reminisce with your family, and maybe even recreate one of these meals in your own kitchen, because nostalgia tastes even better when it's shared. Whether you grew up in the 70s or just love hearing about the way things used to be, this trip down memory lane will remind you of the simple magic that once lived on a cafeteria tray. Cafeterias, trays, and the rhythm of school days. School lunches in the 1970s were more than a quick bite. They were central to the rhythm of the school day. The clang of metal trays, the chatter of classmates, and the line of hair-netted cafeteria ladies ladling food onto plates created a scene as memorable as any playground or classroom. Unlike today, where dietary guidelines, organic options, and allergy warnings shape menus, the 1970s cafeteria was simpler, heartier, and unapologetically practical. Choices were few, the flavors were bold, and portions were designed to keep kids full until the final bell. Nobody checked calorie counts, and nutritional labels weren't a topic of conversation. If it was warm, filling, and cheap to make in bulk, it had a place on the menu. The decade was marked by bold flavors, comfort food classics, and the beginning of convenience-driven meals. Frozen vegetables, instant potatoes, and canned soups were staples not just at home, but also in the cafeteria. Yet, for all their practicality, those lunches carried a sense of community and joy. To a hungry child, it didn't matter that the mashed potatoes were instant or the pizza was square. What mattered was that it was hot, it was filling, and it was shared with friends. For many kids, cafeteria time was less about eating quickly and more about connecting, trading food, and joking around with classmates. Lunch wasn't just a meal, it was an event, a midday break from the rigidity of lessons and a reminder that childhood was meant to be lived with laughter. Grilled cheese and tomato soup, the golden duo. If there was ever a crown jewel of 1970s school lunches, it was the pairing of grilled cheese and tomato soup. Simple, warm, and endlessly satisfying, this meal was the perfect antidote to chilly days when the wind rattled the windows and kids came in with red noses from recess. The grilled cheese, made with soft white bread and a single slice of processed American cheese, was perfectly crisped on the outside and irresistibly gooey on the inside. Sometimes the bread was a little too browned, sometimes the cheese didn't quite melt evenly, but that didn't matter. One bite, followed by a spoonful of tangy tomato soup, created a balance of flavors that was both comforting and unforgettable. For many kids, this was comfort food in its purest form. The crunch of buttered bread meeting the creamy, cheesy middle, then being dipped into the steaming soup, created a sensory experience that no one forgot. Some kids dunked their sandwich into the soup with careful precision, while others dropped the whole thing in and scooped it out with a spoon. However it was eaten, it was a ritual of warmth, connection, and joy. Parents might have made this duo at home on weekends, but in the cafeteria, it tasted different, perhaps because it was eaten in the company of dozens of other children, or because the memory of waiting in line for it made the payoff sweeter. This wasn't just lunch. It was a hug on a tray. Square pizza, the legend of Pizza Day. Ask any 1970s kid about their favorite lunch, and chances are they'll shout, "Pizza Day." But it wasn't the round pizzas you'd find at a restaurant or a modern delivery box. No, in the cafeteria, pizzas came in perfectly square slices, cut from large sheets of dough that baked in industrial ovens. With a slightly chewy crust, a layer of tangy tomato sauce, and a gooey topping of mozzarella that sometimes stretched for miles when pulled apart, these pizzas became legendary. The edges were crisp, the middle was soft, and every bite carried a mix of textures that somehow always satisfied. What made them iconic wasn't just the taste, it was the anticipation. Kids circled Pizza Day on their mental calendars, knowing the smell of baking dough and cheese would drift down the hallways by mid-morning, teasing them through math class and spelling tests. When trays were finally handed over, the cafeteria became a sea of smiles. Some kids sprinkled their slice with the little red pepper flakes offered in shakers, while others simply enjoyed the gooey cheese as it was. To this day, the memory of square pizza can spark nostalgic debates about whether it was truly good or just good because it was pizza. But ask anyone who lived it, they'll tell you it was both. Salisbury steak with mashed potatoes. Hearty, rich, and unapologetically filling, Salisbury steak with mashed potatoes was a cafeteria staple. The dish was usually a ground beef patty, sometimes a bit crumbly, smothered in thick brown gravy, served alongside a scoop of mashed potatoes, often whipped from an instant mix, but beloved nonetheless. To children of the 1970s, this meal represented grown-up food made kid-friendly. It wasn't a burger, but it wasn't too far off either. The gravy gave it a savory depth that felt like Sunday dinner had somehow arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Even if the potatoes were a little lumpy or the steak a bit dry, the rich gravy tied everything together. This was the kind of lunch that left kids satisfied for hours. It felt hearty, it felt serious, and it fueled long afternoons of learning. Even decades later, the sight of Salisbury steak on a menu can transport people straight back to their elementary school cafeteria trays, to the sound of forks scraping trays and friends trading jokes across the table. Fish sticks with tartar sauce. Fridays often meant fish, and for many schools that translated into fish sticks. Crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and usually dunked in tartar sauce or ketchup, fish sticks became a quirky but reliable part of the weekly rotation. For some kids, it was a love-it-or-leave-it situation, but even the skeptics remember them fondly today. Fish sticks were practical, affordable, and easy to prepare in bulk. They might not have been gourmet seafood, but they delivered exactly what was needed: protein, crunch, and a familiar flavor. The ritual of lining up for fish sticks was one of those things kids could count on, week after week. The cafeteria would fill with the smell of baking fish, mingling with fries or peas, and while not everyone was thrilled, most ate them happily. Some kids drenched theirs in ketchup, while others dipped carefully into a plastic cup of tartar sauce. That crunch, that dip, and the smell, wafting from the cafeteria line, these are memories baked into the fabric of the 1970s school experience. Sloppy Joes. Messy, delicious chaos. Sloppy Joes lived up to their name. A bun loaded with saucy ground beef, seasoned with tomato, onions, and spices, was a recipe for messy hands and happy kids. Served hot, with the sauce often spilling over the edges of the bun, Sloppy Joes were equal parts chaos and comfort. This was the kind of meal that united kids across the table. Everyone had the same struggle of keeping the sandwich intact, and the shared laughter made it all the better. Napkins became essential, but even they couldn't always contain the mess. And maybe that was the point. Sloppy Joes weren't supposed to be neat. They were supposed to be fun. For many kids, this lunch stood out not just for the flavor, but for the experience. It was impossible to eat a Sloppy Joe without getting a little sauce on your hands, your tray, or maybe even your shirt. But no one minded, because every bite delivered that unmistakable sweet and savory taste that felt like home. Hot dogs and fries, all-American lunch. Few things felt more American than hot dogs paired with fries. In the 1970s, school cafeterias often served this meal on special days, and kids couldn't get enough. The hot dog, sometimes boiled, sometimes grilled, was simple. But when paired with crispy fries, it became a treat that felt bigger than the sum of its parts. For many children, this was the closest thing to fast food they got during the school week. It was fun, it was filling, and it was the kind of meal that made Mondays a little brighter or Fridays worth the wait. Kids would debate over whether mustard or ketchup was the proper topping, and some daring ones even combined both. The fries were golden and salty, sometimes a little soggy, but always devoured. It was a meal that symbolized simplicity. No frills, no gourmet touches, just the kind of classic food that kept kids happy, energized, and ready to finish the school day strong. By now, you can almost see the cafeteria trays lined with these childhood classics. Hear the chatter of kids comparing lunches, and feel the joy of sitting shoulder to shoulder with friends. The first half of our journey through 1970s school lunches shows just how powerful food can be as a time capsule. These meals weren't gourmet, but they were unforgettable. They carried the spirit of the decade, simple, hearty, and built for togetherness. Don't go anywhere, we're just getting started. Next, we'll continue down memory lane with even more iconic dishes, from desserts that sweetened the day to hearty mains that powered kids through the week. If you're smiling already, wait until you see what's coming next. Share this with a friend who grew up in the 70s, and let's see how many of these lunches they still remember. Because sometimes the best way to relive the past is to share it with someone who lived it too. The magic of cafeteria desserts. No journey through 1970s. School lunches would be complete without visiting the sweet side of the tray. While the mains filled you up and kept you going through math and history, it was the desserts, the little extras tucked onto the tray, that kids talked about the most. They were simple, inexpensive, and often mass-produced. Yet, they carried a kind of magic that transformed an ordinary lunch into a treat worth remembering. From puddings to cookies to fruit cups that shined like jewels under cafeteria lights, these small indulgences stitched themselves into the fabric of childhood. Some were traded like treasure, others hoarded until the last bite of the meal, and a few were devoured before the main dish was even touched. In many ways, dessert was the punctuation mark of the 1970s cafeteria experience. Chocolate pudding. Cups, a sweet reward. Few things could brighten a kid's day like seeing a small cup of chocolate pudding sitting on their tray. Creamy, smooth, and topped with a thin plastic seal that had to be peeled back with just the right amount of care, pudding cups were both a snack and a ritual. For some, the joy was in the first spoonful, the cool, chocolatey richness that melted instantly. For others, it was the slow savoring, scraping every last bit from the corners of the cup until it was practically spotless. Sometimes, a dollop of whipped topping made an appearance, turning it into something that felt downright fancy for a cafeteria. Pudding wasn't just a dessert, it was a social experience. Kids traded flavors, compared who got the thickest portion, and sometimes even challenged each other to eat it in one bite. Decades later, many adults still remember pudding cups as the ultimate cafeteria prize, the sweet ending that made even a tough day at school feel a little softer. Jell-O in bright colors. If pudding was comfort, Jell-O was pure fun. No 1970s cafeteria was complete without bowls of brightly colored gelatin that jiggled and wobbled with every step. Lime green, cherry red, orange, or sometimes even mysterious blue, Jell-O was as much entertainment as it was dessert. Kids poked it with spoons, watched it bounce, and sometimes dared each other to flip it upside down and eat it in one gulp. The cafeteria ladies often topped it with a small swirl of whipped cream, which only added to the excitement. Jell-O had another purpose, too. It was a way for schools to serve something sweet on a budget. Cheap to make, easy to portion, and impossible to resist, it became a staple of the 1970s school lunch scene. To this day, the sight of a quivering bowl of gelatin can transport people back to long lunch tables, trays clattering, and the hum of voices rising in the background. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Not every memorable school lunch was hot. Sometimes simplicity carried the day, and nothing was simpler or more iconic than the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. In the 1970s, PB&J was everywhere. The thick spread of peanut butter, paired with a layer of grape or strawberry jelly, was squished between slices of white bread and handed out by the hundreds. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling. Kids knew exactly what they were getting, and the sweet and savory combination never failed to satisfy. The beauty of PB&J was in its versatility. Some kids peeled the sandwich apart to lick the peanut butter or jelly straight from the bread. Others squished it flat to make it easier to eat. And for many, the simple sight of PB&J carried a comfort that rivaled even the heartiest hot meal. Of course, peanut allergies weren't as widely discussed back then, so PB&J was free to reign supreme. Looking back, it wasn't just a sandwich, it was a cultural icon, a lunchtime anchor that every 1970s kid remembers. Tater tots, crispy little treasures. Sometimes it wasn't the main dish or the dessert that stole the show, it was the side. And in the 1970s, no side dish sparked more joy than a scoop of golden brown tater tots. Crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, these little potato bites were irresistible. Kids dipped them in ketchup, ate them plain, or even tried stacking them into tiny towers on their trays. There was something playful about tots that made them stand out from ordinary fries or mashed potatoes. The sound of a tray hitting the counter and revealing a pile of tots was enough to set off cheers at the lunch table. They were snackable, shareable, and just indulgent enough to feel special. Even today, the popularity of tater tots proves that some cafeteria classics never lose their shine. Macaroni and cheese, the ultimate comfort dish. When the cafeteria menu promised macaroni and cheese, kids knew they were in for a good day. Creamy, cheesy, and golden, mac and cheese was the ultimate comfort dish of the 1970s. It wasn't always gourmet, sometimes it was made from processed cheese powder or baked in huge casserole pans, but it never failed to satisfy. The bright orange glow of the cheese sauce, the soft pasta, and the occasional crispy topping made it irresistible. Kids would scoop up forkful after forkful, sometimes mixing in peas or a bite of hot dog if they were lucky enough to have both on the tray. Mac and cheese wasn't just food. It was a reminder that school could be warm, familiar, and even a little indulgent. It was a dish that cut across every region and background, uniting kids in a shared love for cheese-covered pasta that has stood the test of time. Chicken nuggets. Before they were cool today, chicken nuggets are everywhere. But in the 1970s, they were just starting to make their way into cafeterias. When they appeared, kids noticed immediately. Bite-sized, crispy, and perfect for dipping, nuggets became an instant favorite. Back then, they weren't always uniform or perfectly shaped. They looked a little homemade, a little rustic. But that only added to their charm. Served with ketchup or barbecue sauce, they gave kids the fun of eating with their fingers and the joy of knowing they were getting something different. The arrival of chicken nuggets signaled the beginning of a new era in cafeteria food, one where convenience met fun, and kids had more variety than ever before. They were a sneak peek into the future of fast food culture, yet rooted firmly in the communal spirit of the cafeteria. Goulash, the hearty surprise. Not every 1970s school lunch was straightforward. Some days brought surprises like goulash, a dish of elbow macaroni mixed with ground beef, tomatoes, and seasoning. For some kids, it was love at first bite. For others, it was confusing. But one thing was certain. It stuck in their memory. Goulash was hearty, inexpensive, and easy to prepare in bulk, which made it perfect for cafeterias. It might not have been the prettiest dish on the tray, but it delivered a warm, filling punch that got kids through the afternoon. For many, goulash became the kind of dish that symbolized the decade, unpretentious, practical, and always just a little bit surprising. Fruit cups, sweetness in syrup. Sometimes the simplest desserts were the most loved. Tiny fruit cups filled with diced peaches, pears, and cherries, swimming in sweet syrup were a cafeteria mainstay. The act of peeling back the lid, letting the syrup drip onto the tray, and fishing out the cherries was a ritual every kid remembers. Those bright red cherries were like gold, often traded or fought over at the table. Some kids drank the syrup straight, others saved it for the end. Fruit cups were inexpensive and easy for schools to stock, but to kids, they were something special. Sweet, juicy, and colorful, they provided a moment of brightness on even the grayest school days. Mystery meat. Days the great unknown. No trip down memory lane would be complete without mentioning mystery meat. These were the days when the tray revealed something unidentifiable, maybe a meatloaf, maybe a patty, maybe something entirely unique. Kids joked about it, laughed nervously, and sometimes dared each other to try it. But here's the truth. Even when it wasn't clear what was on the plate, most kids ate it. Hunger, curiosity, and the occasional surprisingly tasty bite kept mystery meat alive as one of the most memorable parts of the cafeteria experience. Mystery meat wasn't about the flavor. It was about the shared stories, the laughter, and the sense that everyone was in it together. Looking back, it's one of the quirks that makes 1970s lunches so unforgettable. As our journey through 1970s school lunches comes to a close, it's hard not to smile at the memories. From the golden crunch of tater tots to the sweetness of Jell-O, from the chaos of sloppy joes to the comfort of macaroni and cheese, these meals were more than food. They were the soundtrack of growing up, the flavors of friendship, and the rituals that shaped childhoods. They weren't perfect, they weren't fancy, but they were ours. And even now, decades later, just the thought of square pizza or a pudding cup can bring back a flood of warmth, laughter, and nostalgia. If this trip down memory lane stirred something in you, share it with a friend, a sibling, or even a grandchild. Ask them what they remember from their own school days, and maybe bring one of these meals back to life in your own kitchen. Because the best part of nostalgia isn't just remembering, it's reliving, retelling, and passing it on. After all, food is more than fuel. It's memory, it's culture. And in the case of 1970s school lunches, it's a story worth savoring again and again.